moderated by Zhou, Concordia AI's Senior Research Manager. Jason led the Concordia's State of AI Safety in China report and graduated from Tsinghua University as a Schwarzman Scholar. We welcome our speakers now.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm very proud that Jason is a graduate of Schwarzman Scholars Program.
Thank you so much, Dean Xue. Welcome, Tino, as well. It's such a pleasure to moderate this conversation. Let's just jump right in immediately. So earlier this year in May, the US and China had the first meeting of a bilateral landmark AI dialogue. There were two areas of friction and some areas of clear sort of consensus. They held a professional and constructive discussion, but let's talk a bit about the frictions. So on the Chinese side, there was reference to objections to US technological restrictions, such as some of the ones that Dean Xue just mentioned. And on the Chinese side, on the US side, there were complaints of misuse of AI, including by China. So my first question is, how can we surmount these geopolitical barriers to dialogue? And is it even possible? Let's start first with Tino online, please.
Thank you, Jason. Great to see you again. And Dean, I very much enjoyed your remarks. I also have long been impressed with the Schwarzman Scholars Program. I should add that the best babysitter my wife and I ever had for our kids went on to become a Schwarzman Scholar. She's done great. So I continue to just be impressed with the program. I think the questions are a very urgent one because we have to be honest. The US and China are going to continue to have differences on a whole range of issues. But there is something to learn, I think, from the last dialogue and what we might adapt and adjust as we think about further cooperation in AI safety. And I would observe that the two countries sent, as I understand it, somewhat different teams to the discussion. On the China side, there was a set of specialists in US-China relations. On the US side, there was more of a team focused on science and technology issues. So I think the first point to observe is that when we have the full range of complexity affecting both countries, it's entirely possible that simply an occasional lack of coordination will lead to a different set of expectations about what a discussion can accomplish and what the right team is to send. And ultimately, I think the bigger issue is we have to work on a set of challenges that affect both countries, that involve what technology can be shared, what technology is viewed as being more sensitive and more related to national security, but at the same time figure, and here I'm borrowing a page from Dean Xue's remarks, what are the spaces we can create for technically oriented people? With background both in the sort of highly technical side of machine learning and so on, as well as deep knowledge of policy of international institutions, of mechanisms for policy coordination, to have a safe space to talk and compare notes and ultimately see where, as the opportunities for progress open up, we can move more quickly. Just to end with one concrete example, notwithstanding some differences about chips and export limits and so on, there's a clear shared interest on both countries' parts in sharing best practices around safety and evaluation. Because that's a need that both societies have, and frankly, the rest of the world does. And I think China and the US, individually and together, can actually light the way and help a whole bunch of other countries with billions of people in population enhance their capacity for progress. So simply the dialogue and the sharing of information, the kind of joint research that Dean is talking about, will enable progress there, even if discussions have to continue at a political and policy level and things that are going to create some differences of view.
What about Dean Xue?
Yeah. I totally agree with what Tino's comment. I think that indeed it's great to see that the dialogue actually happened. I think that's sort of the wonderful thing. And also, of course, we see there's a kind of asymmetry in terms of Tino mentioned about the team, the composition, and so on. But that also is a symptom of the current US-China relations. If there are indeed very frequent and very cordial sort of communication, that sort of thing might not happen. I think that could be seen as part of the issue is that there's not enough communication ahead of the time to see what are the specific issues we want to address and also what kind of people should attend. But I think actually the current, at least from the readout from both sides, I think that at least can get people to start to recognize, what are the issues people are concerned about and so on. And I think exactly as we've seen in China, China is always trying to balance the development and risk governance. So risk is certainly a major part. But as people have already said, that no development is the largest risk. And that's not just for the US, China, but also for the global community. If you have a well-developed AI system, an application in US and China, but the rest of the world, I think, are being left out. And that's probably the greatest risk that we're going to face.
Thank you both. I think it's clear that there's both optimism and pessimism towards government-level dialogues, but it sounds like actually there may be more optimism for dialogues between experts. So maybe I could ask the both of you, what is one thing that you've learned or changed your mind on from discussions with foreign experts on AI? Maybe Dean Xue can go first.
I think that, of course, I learned a great deal about the AI safety and the governance issues. I think the so-called existential risk, I think that's sort of indeed, I think that certainly we previously, when we think about that, we think about, AI systems that might get out of control. But I think that, when people raise it to the level of there might be, the threat to the existence of humanity, and that indeed I think was, through the interactions with the international experts.
Interesting. What about Tino?
Yeah, I've found the unofficial back-channel dialogues that we've been lucky enough to conduct that have included Dean Xue, his representatives at times, have been revealing when you look at priorities on safety that the Chinese and the American participants have offered. In some cases, the list of priorities differs pretty strongly when you think about issues like misinformation or labor market effects, loss of control. But actually, there's been quite a bit of convergence when you ask participants a second round of questions, which is, well, even recognizing some differences in how you rank the risks, what are some of the more promising areas of cooperation you can find? And I've been impressed at how you get a shift and a convergence around safety testing, for example, to some extent around the point that Dean Xue made about engaging other countries, emerging powers, developing regions, and so on. I think, to my mind, there's also been a bit of evolution in my own thinking about the usefulness of the role of the UN. Let's be clear, the UN has a very important role to play globally, no question about it. But how to find a balance between what the UN can do very well and where the UN might buttress its own capabilities and processes with some engagement with outside groups, with outside experts from different countries, with civil society, with other countries, with other organizations like the OECD. That, to me, opens up a space for cooperation that puts the UN in a key position, but it's not all or nothing. It's not, does the UN do this, do you do this outside? But rather, can you create a web of relationships that empowers the UN to play the most constructive role possible? So I think the dialogues we've had have really shifted my thinking with respect to that.
Thank you so much. I think it's clear that there's a lot that we can learn from each other, particularly on priorities for AI safety, what counts as AI safety, and how we can test and evaluate for that. And I'm glad that we also had discussions on those topics earlier today that involved such exchanges of best practices and such. So let's just close with one more question. I'd like to ask both of you, what is perhaps just the top message that you would like to convey to foreign experts, or one misperception about your country's approach to AI governance or international view on international governance that you might want to share with the audience today? Let's start with Tino this time.
Thank you. I have two messages, one about possible misperceptions, the other about ultimately how to think about the road ahead. It's natural to expect countries that put a lot of time and energy into advancing their technological capabilities to seem well coordinated, where different strategies fit together. There's sort of like a direction forward that is viewed as priority by policymakers across the board. The reality is that the US, like many countries, has both strengths and weaknesses that arise from its own fragmentation, from the fact that different people in government have somewhat different views. There's federalism too, so you have states like California, Utah, Colorado, New York that ultimately play a role in this. You have industry, you have civil society. So I think one misperception is how much of a unified strategy there is in the US, when the reality is a much more dynamic and organic process. That can be a strength. That's partly why these dialogues we're talking about at the unofficial level are so important. My takeaway from that and from the entire discussion we've been having here is that we not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There is going to be plenty of work to do to get further progress in the US-China relationship bilaterally across a whole range of issues that range from geopolitical and geostrategic to economic. But to my mind, nothing about that complexity blocks real progress on technical cooperation, AI safety discussions, constructive approaches to policy. And that's all the more important because all the good progress that will happen domestically in the US and China and other countries on primarily domestic issues involving, for example, consumer protection and AI, will still leave on the table some key issues that get closer to complex shared international challenges that will only be best addressed by a degree of dialogue and connection across borders, including with the US and China, that are going to require opening and maintaining of these channels of communication.
Thank you so much, Tino. And Dean Xue, what about you?
Yeah, I think the first message I'd like to convey is that, as using the term used by my colleagues here previously, AI safety is a global public good. One country is unsafe, the global is unsafe. So I think that's probably the first message I'd like to convey. The second message is that on AI safety, China wants to collaborate with everybody, with every country in the world. And China will try to, to have the platform like this one, to invite everybody to come. China does not want to be excluded from other platforms, and China will not exclude others for the same reason. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I think this discussion highlights the importance of these dialogues and these expert conversations, and hope that it will continue to yield such wonderful and beneficial results. Thank you both. Thank you, Dean Xue, for coming in person, and thank you, Tino, for staying up so late.
Thank you again, Dean Xue, Tino, and Jason. Our next speaker is Professor Zhong Yi, who is the director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence Ethics and Governance